30, 40 years ago, but it shows you how disconnected the people in charge and with the money to spend on these elaborate parties and $8,500 in sushi that could have gone to some single mother are. They're just completely disconnected, living in their ivory towers. And anyway, can you speak on that as far as the disconnection?
Yeah, a couple of things. When you think about the GSA, this is the federal agency that's supposed to be watching over our tax dollars and make sure they're spent properly. So when the GSA is squandering taxpayers' dollars and then ridiculing government inspector generals who are supposed to watchdog them, just think of how they conduct themselves on a daily basis, right? In regard to the mainstream media, here's something I've learned the hard way. I was being interviewed by a major television network and talking about the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants. And I mentioned Lockheed and Boeing. Well, that story never aired because Lockheed and Boeing were two of the major advertisers on the television network.
Sure.
And what I've come to understand is you will not see television networks run negative stories about their advertisers. So you will not see stories about the oil companies and how they're making excessive profits and paying no federal income tax, and how they're robbing us at the pump and overcharging for gas, and how they raise the price of gas in a way that's disproportionate to the price of crude oil.
The companies themselves, that NBC, for instance, owned by GE, they're not even paying any taxes.
I'll tell you a story about that. In 2003, NBC came out to my office from New York to California to spend a week doing a story about me. And it never ran because I talked about a bunch of companies that were guilty of federal contracting fraud, and they were subcontractors to GE. So that story never ran. So I've had a number of stories actually not run because I mentioned companies that were affiliated with different news organizations or advertisers. But I'm sure everyone watching this show has seen that ad from the American Petroleum Institute, the lady in the black suit walking across the map talking about the resources in America. They spend billions advertising on network television. Think about it. What are they trying to sell? Why are they running those ads?
Public opinion. Yeah, brainwashing.
That's propaganda for the oil and gas industry. Sure. And they're trying to buy clout with the news channels so they won't run these negative stories. But
well, these BP ads, come to Louisiana, come to Florida. Everything's fine down here.
Yeah.
Is it? Is it? We're Americans, okay? You can't pull the wool over our eyes. It's probably not okay down there, okay? Why don't you run an ad that says, well, this is how things really are. We're working on it. No, it's not. It's not that ad at all. It's Walt Disney World. Hey, everything's great.
Yeah.
You know? Come on down and eat some oysters filled with oil.
Yeah.
It'll be good for you.
Unfortunately, these big corporations control the media. When you're watching national television, ask yourself this question: what percentage of national advertising comes from Fortune 500 corporations?
Let me just guess. Do you know the number?
I think it's 90%.
I would, have to be in the 90s.
When you think about the big lobbying firms in Washington, Preston, Gates, and Ellis, and these big lobbying firms, what percentage of the money that they get comes from Fortune 500 corporations? Probably like 100%.
Well,
so big corporations control the lobby in Washington. They control Congress. They control, the White House. They control the news organizations. It's logical. Think about it, right? What's the function of a television network? Its function is to make money by selling advertising. That's its function. The function of a news organization isn't to inform the people. It's to sell advertising.
Right.
And so you're not going to do stories that show that your biggest advertiser is guilty of federal contracting fraud, are cheating the American people out of billions of dollars a day by overcharging for gas. So quite frankly, to me, mainstream media has almost become like propaganda for the Fortune 500 corporations. And unfortunately, the general public watches national television and they see those stories. They go, oh, that's what's happening because I saw it on television. No, that's not what's happening. That's what they want you to think is happening. But it's logical. Think about it. They're trying to sell advertising. The Fortune 500 firms are their customers. They're not going to run stories that show that their customers, are violating federal law and cheating the public. So you can't get what's really happening off of the news.
Well, we thank you for joining us, Mr. Chapman. I could talk to you all day, and hopefully you're going to be on with Alex here pretty soon, maybe next week. But this is just a complete ludicrous travesty, and but it's of course par for the course. And thanks again for joining us, and take care.
Thank you. You guys are fantastic.
All right, and so are you. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, Lloyd. Ladies and gentlemen, Lloyd Chapman from the American Small Business League. And now moving on to important geothermal news, which you may or may not find anywhere else but here at InfoWars. The Ring of Fire is roaring to life, and there will be earthquakes of historic importance. This American Dream article goes through the history of the Ring of Fire, and lately there's been a lot of activity as far as the Ring of Fire and its threat on not only earthquakes and volcanoes, but also nuclear events. So we start out here with, does it seem to you like there has been an unusual amount of seismic activity around the world lately? Well, it isn't your imagination. The Ring of Fire is roaring to life, and that is really bad news for the west coast of the United States. Approximately 90% of all earthquakes and approximately 75% of all volcanic eruptions occur along the Ring of Fire. It also goes on to say that on Wednesday, the most powerful strike-slip earthquake ever recorded happened along the Ring of Fire. As long as that happens outside of any area where people are living, that's fine. But once it moves into California or moves into Japan or any place along the Ring of Fire, let's take a look at that graphic again. It's gonna be a massive shift in life on Earth. In 2001, there were 137 earthquakes of magnitude 6.0 or greater, and in 2011, there were 205. Again, 2001, 137, 2011, 205. And of course, what that means to our nuclear reactors that sit on the Ring of Fire, as you can see, we've got plenty there in the great Northwest and in California and along China, Japan, and of course, we've already had the Fukushima disaster. Maybe that's just an appetizer for the big meal awaiting us. Again, that article, the American Dream article, the Ring of Fire is roaring to life, and there will be earthquakes of historic importance. Please check it out at INFOWARS.com. Moving on now to a Houston councilwoman who warns of UN agenda in city projects. Oh, the word is beginning to get out. Activists and some politicians see Agenda 21 as a UN-led conspiracy to impose worldwide control on people, in part by denying private property rights through the implementation of sustainable growth or green initiatives by local and state governments. Just what we've been talking about here for the past week. And of course, it also goes on to say, this is the United States of America. We don't answer to anyone but the good old U.S. of A. Get that through your thick UN skull. It doesn't say that in here, but I just said that. Brown said during discussions of the garages, by this vote, we're giving $26 million to a non-American initiative and interest. And speaking of the impending green initiative pressing down on us like a boot pressing down on our neck by authority, we now go to this piece, or these pieces from Darren McBreen and Marcos Morales about the honest, hardworking chicken man who was just trying to do the right thing up there in Roswell, Georgia.
We are standing in front of what used to be the home of Andrew Werdes, who died tragically on March 26th of this year following an explosion that took place right here at his home. And this was as county marshals actually attempted to evict him from his property. Now, this property was seized by green zoning laws by the city of Roswell. They claim the land is future conservation area, and they call it green space. And for those of you who are having a hard time believing that, as I did, you can actually go see for yourself on the RoswellGov.com's own website. They call it the City of Roswell's 2030 Comprehensive Plan. We're going to show you some of the devastation caused by the explosion and the fire that followed. You can actually still smell the burnt wood from the fire. This is truly a shocking and tragic story. You know, this man had his property seized and was terrorized to death by the city of Roswell, Georgia. I'm Darren McBreen for INFOWARS Nightly News. We're actually going to go to the city council right now and see if we can get them to answer some very serious questions. This is Darren McBreen signing out. Well, a funny thing happened to us in front of City Hall in Roswell, Georgia today. We showed up here moments ago to enter City Hall, see if we can interview some of the people in the city council, perhaps talk to the mayor. And we were immediately met by police officers who told us we were not allowed to enter City Hall. Also, they told us we weren't allowed to take any photographs and that we must have the proper credentials to photograph in the area. You know, we had a little scene that went on for a while. Marcos and I kind of schooled them on our basic rights and that we're allowed to photograph. But interesting, this family over here, moments later, showed up and began taking pictures right there in front of City Hall. So apparently, some people are allowed to, others, info warriors, are not. I'm Darren McBreen, InfoWars.com.
Thank you, Darren McBreen, for that report. And of course, those guys will be back on Monday to file an extensive report on the Agenda 21 manipulation that is happening worldwide, but especially here in the United States as of late. Now, moving on to water restrictions could soon be permanent, another Agenda 21-esque story. We don't have enough water for those people. In less than 20 years, you talk about a deficit in Washington. We have a deficit right here in North Texas, and it's water. So they're saying water restrictions could soon be permanent in Dallas. All the rain that's fallen in recent weeks has a lot of people looking forward to an easing of watering restrictions, but city leaders in several DFW cities want to make them permanent. And there they go again, controlling our lives, our very water, our very drinking water, that lovely fluoride water. Moving on to an article that I wanted to point out to folks just to get educated from someone who's very experienced, number 2 there at the Department of Treasury under Reagan, Mr. Paul Craig Roberts, wrote a report called Washington Leads World into Lawlessness. And if you have any questions about the Obama administration or our intentions in Iran or the fact that we are leading the rest of the world down a slippery slope of complete criminal activity, well, he documents it all right here. For example, he says, Washington violates the human rights of its own citizens. Washington has suspended the civil liberties guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution and declared its intention to detain U.S. citizens indefinitely without due process of law. President Obama has announced that he, at his discretion, can murder U.S. citizens whom he regards as a threat to the U.S. And it's a very extensive read and a good report. I just wanted to point that out tonight on the news for folks who need to be educated, or if you want to just go back and look over what's been happening here recently with our republic. Now, moving on to a very interesting story. Since the booms that were taking place up in Wisconsin, we had hinted at the fact that we thought that there could be a possibility that these booms, the source of these booms, could be high-speed rail. Well, it was brought to our attention by the Intel Hub that the LA to New York in a half an hour, 10,000 plus mile per hour tunnel train used for underground bases has been underway for a long time. It's been under the agenda of the Rand Corporation, who in 1972 in the LA Times, June 11, 1972 LA Times said, a Rand Corporation physicist has devised a rapid transit system to get you from Los Angeles to New York in half an hour for a $50 fare. That's back when people were good and honest and weren't going to use things for their own means. I'm talking about the elitists. He said